They said money couldn't buy love, but my family tried to prove it wrong. When my sister's luxury gifts earned applause, and my handmade one earned laughter, I stayed quiet. The next morning I took back every cent I ever gave them. By the time they realized what they'd lost, it wasn't the money. It was me. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, yet don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. It was Christmas Eve in Boulder, Colorado, and my parents' house looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine, 2 stories wrapped in gold lights, every window glowing. The 12-foot tree in the living room shimmered with crystal ornaments and white ribbons, and the dining table stretched the length of the room, covered with a red velvet cloth and fine china. My mother only brought out for special occasions. Jazz played softly under the buzz of polite laughter. It smelled like cinnamon wine and polished wood. It should have felt like home, but to me it felt staged, like every smile had been rehearsed. I arrived late, as I always did, hoping no one would notice. My 10-year-old daughter Ava followed beside me, clutching the small gift we'd wrapped that morning. Brown paper, red ribbon, a little tag with my handwriting. Inside was a wooden picture frame I'd carved myself. Reclaimed pine, sanded smooth, etched with the outline of the old farmhouse, where we used to live when money was tight and laughter was real. My sister Lauren was already there, of course. She stood near the tree in a red sequined dress that caught every bit of light, a glass of champagne in her hand. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she turned, flashing that smile that always made people lean closer. "Claire, you made it," she said, air-kissing my cheek, leaving the faint scent of expensive perfume. My parents, Richard and Martha, were in their element. My mother flitting from guest to guest, my father pouring drinks, both of them avoiding my eyes. "Everyone, this is Lauren." Mom said proudly, waving a hand as if the guests didn't already know. "Our successful girl, the owner of Aspen and Lace Boutique in Vale. You should see her new line. It's just stunning." I smiled, took off Ava's coat, and guided her to the far end of the table. No one asked how my consulting business was going, or if I was doing all right. They never did. Dinner went on for nearly an hour, prime rib wine laughter that grew louder with every pour. When it was time for gifts, Lauren's came first. She stood in the center of the room like it was a stage. "I wanted to do something special this year," she announced. My mother's eyes lit up before the wrapping paper was even off. Inside were 2 first-class tickets to Italy, and a Swiss watch my father had once pointed out in a catalog. The room erupted in applause. "Oh, sweetheart," Mom said, voice trembling. "You make us so proud." Dad nodded, raising his glass. "That's my girl. Knows how to show appreciation." I waited until the noise faded before sliding our little package across the table. "We made something for you," I said quietly. Ava's eyes were bright, hopeful. My mother untied the ribbon, peeled back the brown paper, and looked down at the wooden frame. For a moment she said nothing. Then her mouth curved not into a smile, but something tighter. "You still like making these little craft things?" she asked. Lauren leaned over her laughter, sharp enough to cut through the jazz. "Cheap, worthless trash," she said, shaking her head. "You really haven't changed, have you?" Dad chuckled, topping off his wine. "You could learn from your sister Claire. She knows how to buy something that matters." The air went still. Forks froze midair. I felt my throat tighten, the warmth drain from my face. Around me, people smiled awkwardly, pretending it was all a joke. I managed a thin smile, fingers pressed against my knee to keep from trembling. Ava looked up at me, her lip quivering. I placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, silent. For the rest of the night, conversation drifted around me like background noise. I caught pieces, someone praising Lauren's boutique, someone else asking about the Italian trip. My parents glowed under the attention, their voices full of pride. I stayed quiet, counting down the minutes until it would be polite to leave. When dessert ended, I saw Lauren pull out her phone. A few minutes later, a notification buzzed on mine. Against my better judgment, I looked. Her post was already climbing with likes, a photo of our parents smiling, holding their new gifts. The caption read, "The most valuable things in life are never cheap." My face wasn't in the frame. It never was. I stood, smoothing Ava's hair. "We should get going," I said. My mother barely looked up. "Already?" "But it's Christmas. I'm tired," I replied. "Long day." I didn't bother to hide the exhaustion in my voice. Lauren smiled sweetly, the kind that was meant to sting. "Drive safe, sis." Outside, snow fell thick and slow, soft against the windshield. The lights from the house glowed behind us, golden and distant. Ava sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, staring at the gift box we'd taken back because no one wanted it. After a while, she whispered, "Mom, why didn't they like it?" I kept my eyes on the road. Some people forget what gifts are really for. I said, "They think value means money." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "So ours wasn't good enough?" I reached over, squeezed her hand. "Ours was perfect. Don't ever let anyone make you think something made with love is small." We drove the rest of the way in silence, headlights cutting through the falling snow. By the time we reached home, the wind had picked up. I turned off the engine, sat for a moment staring through the windshield. The reflection of my parents' house flickered in my mind. Warm lights, perfect smiles. A family portrait missing one face. "Come on, sweetheart," I said softly. "Let's go inside." Ava nodded, carrying the little box in both hands. I watched her climb the steps, her small boots leaving tracks in the snow. Behind us, the town was quiet, the sky heavy with clouds. I took one last look toward the direction of Boulder before closing the door. For the first time, I realized that whatever warmth I'd been chasing there wasn't mine anymore. The next morning, the house was quiet, except for the sound of the heater clicking on and off. Winter sunlight filtered through the blinds, pale and cold, stretching across the cluttered desk in my living room. My laptop was open to a spreadsheet, rows of numbers, automatic transfers bills, paid like clockwork. One of them caught my eye, a payment scheduled to go out to my parents' mortgage account. I'd set it up years ago thinking it would just be temporary. I hadn't turned it off since. Steam rose from my coffee mug as I stared at the screen, watching the cursor blink. It was strange how easy it was to automate love, to turn guilt into a monthly transaction. My phone buzzed. The name flashing across the screen made my stomach tighten. "Dad," I hesitated before answering. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, his tone brisk like we were discussing the weather. "Listen, your mother and I got a notice about the property taxes. Lauren's got her money tied up in the business, so I was wondering if you could cover it this quarter. You've always been so good with finances." I pressed my fingers to my temple. "How much is it?" He named a number higher than I expected. I stared at the sunlight trembling on the rim of my mug. "I'll look into it," I said finally. "That's my girl." He sounded relieved. "I knew we could count on you." When the line went dead, the silence felt heavier than before. I scrolled through my accounts, the familiar trail of withdrawals and transfers. Proof that I'd been the quiet safety net no one ever thanked. Ava wandered in her hair, still messy from sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Morning, Mom. Morning, baby." I smiled, trying to sound normal. She climbed onto the couch beside me. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." She hesitated. "Why didn't Grandma like your gift?" The question stung more than I wanted it to. I turned to face her, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. "Because sometimes," I said softly, "grown-ups forget what gifts are really about. They forget that love doesn't come with a price tag." She frowned like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "But you worked hard on it. I know." I took a deep breath. "Some people just can't see the value in things made with heart." Ava nodded slowly, still not convinced, but she let it go. "Can I draw now?" "Of course." She padded off to her art table, humming quietly. The house felt too still again. I opened my messages. A new text blinked from Lauren. "Mom and Dad said you should stop giving those handmade things. It's kind of sad." I stared at the screen. The words looked almost casual, like she'd typed them between sips of her latte. I hovered over the keyboard, thought about replying, then deleted the draft and hit clear. The conversation vanished, but the weight stayed. For a while I just sat there, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. My chest felt tight, as if the walls themselves were pressing closer. I stood and walked out to the small balcony that overlooked the frozen street. The air bit at my face sharp and clean. A thin layer of snow clung to the railing, untouched, pure. I remembered something Noah had told me years ago when I was first divorced and drowning in debt. You don't have to prove your worth by how much you can endure. At the time, I thought he was wrong. I thought being strong meant never saying no. Now, watching the snow fall in lazy spirals, I realized he'd been right. Strength wasn't endurance, it was refusal. The day drifted by in slow motion. I worked on a few client files, answered emails, cooked pasta for Ava, and tried not to think about my family. But as the evening came and the light outside turned blue, my thoughts returned to that blinking line of numbers. After Ava went to bed, I poured another cup of coffee and opened the laptop again. The spreadsheet was still there, my automatic payments waiting in neat rows, obedient and precise. Mortgage support. Morgan residence. Transfer date, 25th of every month. Amount, $200. I clicked the small pencil icon beside it. A box appeared. Edit or cancel. My finger hovered over the touchpad. For years I'd told myself it wasn't about the money, that I helped because family should help family. But family, I was starting to see, had become another word for obligation. I thought of last night, the way my mother's voice had tightened over the word cheap, the way my father had smiled while telling me to learn from Lauren. And I thought of Ava's question. Why didn't Grandma like your gift? I exhaled slowly. The cursor blinked once more. Then I clicked cancel. The system asked, "Are you sure you want to stop this payment?" "Yes." I whispered to no one. A confirmation popped up. Transfer canceled. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glow of the screen. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heater and the wind scraping against the windows. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the first breath after holding it for too long. Down the hall, Ava murmured in her sleep. I got up, walked to her room, and pulled the blanket over her shoulders. She stirred, smiling faintly. I stood there for a long time listening to her soft breathing, watching the rise and fall of her chest. When I went back to the living room, I turned off the laptop, leaving the room in darkness, except for the faint light of the snow outside. Maybe it was nothing, a single click, a small act no one would notice. But somewhere deep down, I knew it was the beginning of something that would change everything. The smell of roasted beans hit me the moment I walked into the cafe. It was one of those sleek little places in downtown Denver where people in tailored coats sat behind laptops pretending not to eavesdrop. Snow melted from my boots onto the black tile floor as I spotted him near the window. Noah Reed stood when he saw me, the same easy confidence he'd always had. Only now there were faint lines at the corners of his eyes. "Claire Morgan," he said with a grin. "You still take your coffee black." "Still can't handle milk," I said, shaking his hand. It had been 3 years since we'd seen each other, but it felt shorter, like the kind of friendship that hibernated instead of ending. We found a quiet table by the window. Outside, traffic hissed over wet pavement. Inside, the air was warm, almost too comfortable. So he said, leaning back. Still consulting, I gave a short laugh. "Technically, though lately it feels like I only manage other people's messes. Clients, family, take your pick." He raised an eyebrow. "Family finance is a dangerous sport. Tell me about it." I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitterness steady me. "You remember my sister Lauren? The one who thought she'd be a designer? She's a business owner now." I said, "Aspen and Lace Boutique. I helped her start it. 85 grand from my savings." His expression shifted, a lawyer's instinct turning on. 85,000. "Every cent I'd saved after my divorce," I said quietly. She promised partnership. I believed her. I told him about the Christmas dinner, the laughter, the handmade gift, the way my parents had sided with Lauren like it was muscle memory. I didn't realize until I said it out loud how much it still burned. Noah didn't interrupt. When I finished, he reached for the folder I'd brought. "Do you have the agreement?" I slid the papers across the table. He scanned the first few pages, his brow furrowing. "You gave her full operational control." "She said she needed flexibility." "Claire," he said softly. "Flexibility's lawyer speak for loophole." He flipped to the expense sheets, tracing a finger down the column marked marketing. "These withdrawals here. This can't be right. There are duplicate vendor entries. Same amounts, same dates. It looks like she's paying herself." The words landed like a punch. "You're sure?" He turned the paper toward me. "You could check, but it's pretty clear. I've seen this before. Someone hiding personal expenses under business categories. Trips, parties, clothes." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice even. "If I pull out now, they'll call me a traitor. My parents already think I'm jealous." He studied me for a moment. "You're not worried about being called a traitor. You're worried they'll stop needing you." I froze, the truth of it too sharp. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out thin. "You always were blunt." "It's my charm," he said, smiling. "Then quieter, Claire. You've spent your whole life holding up people who never once asked if you were tired. Maybe it's time to put some weight down." The sunlight from the window cut across the table, catching the edge of my coffee cup. My fingers trembled slightly when I reached for it. I looked out at the street, people rushing by, heads down, scarves flying, and felt a strange stillness inside me. a kind of clarity I hadn't known in years. I'm tired of being their safety net, I said. Every fall they take, I'm the one that breaks the landing. He nodded. Then stop catching them. The words were simple, final, like closing a door. When we finished, I gathered the papers back into the folder. Noah walked me to the door, his breath fogging in the cold. You don't owe them an explanation, he said. You just owe yourself peace. Peace. The words stayed with me as I drove home through the gray afternoon. Ava was at her grandmother's friend's house for a play date, so the house was empty. I set the folder down on the table and stood there for a long time. The light from the window hit the same spot it had that morning. My coffee mug still sat where I'd left it, ringed with brown at the edges. I opened my laptop. The same spreadsheet blinked up at me. Mortgage payments, transfers, the endless loop of giving. I scrolled to the bottom and opened a blank email. To finance at First Boulder Bank, .com. Subject cancellation of automatic transfers. Please terminate all monthly payments from account 2123, ending 91. Effective immediately. I typed my name and stared at it for a few seconds before hitting send. The confirmation ping echoed through the room, small but final. Then, because habit dies hard, I logged into my parents' account just to see. The most recent transaction, my transfer, had posted that morning. I copied the reference number, opened a new document, and labeled it Final. Outside, snow had started falling again, soft against the window. I closed the laptop and sat there listening to the muffled quiet that always came with snowstorms. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it's just the moment you stop paying for someone else's peace. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like the sound of something ending the way it should. Aspen was glistening under a fresh layer of snow, the kind that looked beautiful from a distance and impossible to drive through up close. The streets were lined with boutiques dressed in fairy lights and wreaths every window advertising luxury and exclusivity. I parked across from Aspen and Lace and just sat there for a moment, watching my sister pose under the store's glowing sign like she owned half the town, which technically she did with my money. The boutique's glass doors opened and closed as guests stepped inside. Champagne flutes sparkled, laughter spilled onto the street, and a photographer snapped pictures like this was a magazine shoot. Lauren stood front and center in a white coat cinched at the waist, hair perfectly curled, her smile wide and blinding. I pulled out my phone, opened a link I'd seen that morning. Local designer conquers Aspen with her refined vision. The headline read. The article was by Samantha Lowe, a name I recognized from the Denver Post. There she was. Lauren Bennett, young entrepreneur visionary, the face of Colorado's next luxury success. The photos looked airbrushed, her boutique gleaming, the caption quoting her about sustainability and women's empowerment. I almost laughed. Empowerment built on someone else's bank account. Still, a small part of me couldn't help feeling proud. She'd done what she always did, turned a fantasy into a spotlight. Then I opened the latest quarterly report. The numbers were neat, precise, and wrong. The marketing expenses were double what we'd agreed upon. Travel, consulting, entertainment, every category bloated. I traced the totals with my finger, my jaw tightening. Before I could overthink it, I stepped out of the car and crossed the street. The air bit at my cheeks, snowflakes catching on my coat. Inside, the boutique was warm and sweet with the scent of vanilla and perfume. The walls gleamed pale gold, racks of silk and wool lining the space. A live trio played soft acoustic music in the corner. Lauren spotted me almost instantly. Her smile faltered for half a second before snapping back into place. Claire. You made it, she said, voice too bright. Everyone. This is my sister. A few guests turned politely, murmured hello. One woman whispered something behind her glass. Lauren leaned close to me, whispering through her teeth. What are you doing here? I'm in the middle of an event. I won't stay long. I said. I handed her a folded report. Can we talk about these expenses? Her eyes flicked down at the paper, then back up sharp. Seriously, you came here to talk about paperwork. This isn't small, Lauren. You're pulling twice what we budgeted for. Flights, hotels, brand retreats. It's all here. She laughed softly, shaking her head as if I were a child who didn't understand grown-up rules. You don't get it. This is how the industry works. You have to spend to stay visible. It's called marketing. Marketing doesn't usually include five-star resorts. Those are partnerships, she said quickly. And honestly, Claire, maybe you should stay in your lane. You understand, numbers not branding. Before I could reply, our mother appeared beside us, holding a flute of champagne. She looked elegant as always, her pearl necklace gleaming under the lights. "Claire, darling," she said, voice sweet but tired. "Must we do this now? Your sisters worked so hard. You should be proud." "I am proud," I said, keeping my voice low. "I just want to understand where the money's going." Mom sighed, giving me the kind of look that meant I was embarrassing her. "You always overthink things. You should trust Lauren. She has vision." The word hit me harder than it should have. Vision. That was the same word Mom used when Dad's projects fell apart, when debt was called ambition, when failure was rebranded as risk. Lauren crossed her arms. "Are we done? Because I have a store to run." I looked at her, at the lights glinting off her dress, at the guests who thought she was something she wasn't. I wanted to argue. Instead, I nodded. "We're done." She turned away before I finished speaking, already smiling for the next photo. Mom patted my arm like I was a child who needed calming. "Try to be supportive, Claire. Not everyone is as practical as you." "I've noticed," I said quietly, then walked out into the cold. The sound of laughter followed me through the door, muffled as it closed. Snow swirled under the streetlights, thick and silent. My boots crunched against the ice as I crossed to my car. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there watching the golden light from the boutique windows, watching Lauren shine for everyone but me. My phone buzzed. A message from Ellen Parker, my neighbor back in Denver. "Saw the live stream. They treated you like crap. You okay?" I stared at the message, a tight smile pulling at my mouth. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Then I typed back, "I'm fine." Just finally seeing things clearly. I put the phone down, looked out at the mountains rising behind the town. The snow on the peaks glowed faintly in the moonlight, cold and sharp and real. They call it vision, I thought. But what I saw in that store wasn't vision. It was illusion. One bought with someone else's money wrapped in glitter and debt. Maybe it was time they learned what happens when the illusion runs out. I started the car, the headlights slicing through the falling snow, and pulled away from the boutique. The music and laughter faded behind me until there was only the steady hum of the engine and the whisper of my own breath. For the first time, I didn't feel small driving away. I felt steady, clear, and utterly done pretending. The lobby of the First Denver Bank was quiet enough to hear the soft hum of the heating vents. The place smelled faintly of leather and copier toner. Clean, deliberate, expensive. I stood at the reception desk folder in hand coat, still damp from the snow outside. My breath came out in small clouds as I waited for the manager to arrive. Alan Whitmore appeared a few minutes later, crisp suit, silver tie pin, the kind of man who spoke in measured sentences. "Ms. Morgan," he said, extending a hand. "Good to see you again. Please come in." His office was minimalist, full of glass and polished metal. Through the window, downtown, Denver stretched out under a sky the color of steel. I sat across from him, the folder resting on my lap like a weight. "I understand you wanted to discuss your investment accounts," he began. "Yes," I said. "Specifically the partnership funds tied to Aspen and Lace Boutique." He looked up, expression polite but cautious. "That's your sister's business, correct?" It was... I slid the papers across the desk. "I'm withdrawing my capital. Effective immediately." Alan flipped through the documents, scanning them with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen thousands of transactions. "It's not my place to pry," he said, "but the boutique appears to be doing well, based on recent press coverage." I met his gaze steady. "It's doing well with my money." He nodded once, a tiny acknowledgement that he understood more than he said. "I can initiate a full withdrawal today. Funds should clear within 48 hours. There may be a penalty for early termination, but given the agreement terms, it's minimal." "That's fine," I said. My voice surprised me, level almost calm. Alan turned his computer monitor slightly so I could see. "If you'll confirm these details, I'll process the request." The screen showed the account information, my name beside the deposit date. May 2022, $85,000. 2 years of savings. 1 act of misplaced trust. I signed at the bottom of the form. My handwriting didn't tremble this time. Alan printed a confirmation page and handed it to me. "You'll receive an email within the hour verifying submission. If you need assistance transferring the funds elsewhere, let me know." "Thank you," I said, standing. "Ms. Morgan," he added as I reached the door. "You're doing the right thing. Most people wait too long to protect themselves." I gave a small nod. I already did. Outside, the air hit me like glass. Snowflakes clung to my hair as I walked to the car, clutching the folder under my arm. The city noise felt muted, as if someone had turned the volume down on everything. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing nonstop, messages one after another. I set the folder on the kitchen table before checking them. The first was from Lauren. "What are you doing? Are you insane? Don't ruin this for me." The second followed seconds later. "Just give me 1 more month, I'll pay you back double. Please." Then a third. "You've always hated seeing me succeed." I stared at the screen thumb hovering, then pressed delete on all 3. A kind of peace came with the silence that followed. I set the phone face down, turned on the coffee maker, and waited for the quiet drip to fill the room. The smell of roasted beans spread through the kitchen, warm and grounding. I poured a cup, sat at the table, and unfolded the confirmation papers from the bank. My signature curved across the bottom like a boundary line. Above it, in clean digital print, withdrawal request submitted, processing within 48 hours. For years, I'd told myself fairness was something you fought for in courtrooms, in conversations, in compromise. But as the sunlight slid across the table, glinting off the black ink of my name, I realized justice didn't always need an audience. Sometimes it was one quiet decision, one document signed, one cycle broken. The heater clicked on again, the only sound in the house. I traced my finger along the edge of the paper, letting the weight of it settle. The laptop chimed with a new email. I opened it. Subject, withdrawal. Request approved. A simple sentence, a digital stamp of finality. I closed the lid, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for months eased, leaving an unfamiliar lightness behind. Outside the window, flakes were falling faster now, swirling under the pale afternoon light. Cars moved slowly through the slush, their headlights glowing in the haze. For once, I didn't feel trapped watching them go. I rinsed my mug, turned off the lights, and pulled on my coat. Stepping outside, the cold hit my lungs sharp and clean. The snow had thickened, blanketing the streets in quiet. As I walked to my car, I thought of my sister's boutique shining under those same flakes. Lights, glittering music, playing unaware that its foundation was already shifting beneath it. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel angry anymore. Just steady, like I'd finally stopped waiting for permission to protect myself. By the time I reached the end of the street, the wind had picked up, sweeping across the empty road. The world was white and quiet, and for the first time in years, perfectly still. 2 weeks later, the call came while I was in the middle of grocery shopping. The sound of my phone buzzed against the cart handle, the screen lighting up with a number I recognized from the bank. I answered, half distracted, my breath fogging in the cold aisle. "Ms. Morgan," a polite voice said, "we're confirming the repossession order for the 2021 BMW X5 vehicle ID, ending in 84. You're listed as co-owner and collateral signer. The process will be completed today." I stood still between stacks of cereal boxes, hand tightening around the cart handle. "Today?" "Yes, ma'am. We're coordinating with the recovery team as we speak." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Understood." When the call ended, I set the phone down and stared at the cart. Milk, bread, apples. All ordinary things. I didn't feel triumphant. Just settled. By the time I reached home, my phone was already buzzing with notifications. Aspen and Lace was hosting its Winter Elegance event that night. My sister's big moment. Local influencers, small-town press champagne live music. The kind of spectacle Lauren lived for. I hadn't planned to attend. Now I didn't need to. At 7:42 p.m., I got a message from an unknown number. It was a link to a live stream. Out of habit, I clicked. Lauren stood in the center of the boutique, dazzling in a white silk gown, hair curled to perfection. The boutique was dripping in gold light glasses, clinking guests, smiling. "To Aspen and Lace," she said, raising her champagne. "To growth beauty and the power of vision." Applause filled the room. I was about to close the feed when movement at the back of the store caught my eye. 2 men in dark jackets walked through the door, cutting cleanly through the crowd. One held a clipboard. The other carried a small black case. At first, Lauren kept smiling, thinking they were late guests. "Hello," she said brightly, the glass still in her hand. The taller man spoke quietly, showing her something. "A document." She frowned, tilting her head. "I'm sorry, what is this?" He repeated himself, his voice calm but firm. "We're here on behalf of First Denver Bank. This vehicle." He gestured to the large glass window behind her where the BMW X5 gleamed under the streetlight. "Is subject to repossession. Signed authorization provided by co-owner Ms. Claire Morgan. The name fell into the air like a stone. Lauren's smile broke. The guests turned their chatter dying. A cameraman from one of the local blogs instinctively raised his lens. "This is a mistake," Lauren snapped. "That car's paid for." The man shook his head, tapping the document. "Not according to the records, ma'am. You're behind on payments." She laughed, then a short, nervous sound. "No, you don't understand. My sister. She wouldn't." She turned toward the crowd looking for Mom and Dad, who stood frozen near the refreshments table. "Dad." My mother took a shaky step forward, whispering something I couldn't hear. My father frowned but didn't move. Outside, through the boutique's window, another man attached the towing hook to the BMW's front tire. The engine coughed once, then roared to life as it was lifted slowly onto the flatbed. Lauren ran toward the glass heels, slipping on the polished floor. "You can't take that!" she shouted, pounding once against the window. The photographer caught the moment perfectly. The shimmer of her gown, the panic on her face, the reflection of her own boutique sign behind her, aspen and lace. The livestream comments exploded. "What's happening, OMG, is that a repo wait isn't that her sister's name on the docs." Within minutes, the video was clipped, reposted, shared. The caption spread faster than snow on the mountain fashion boutique loses luxury car mid-event. I sat on my couch, the screen glowing against the dim room. My coffee had gone cold. I watched her expression shift, from shock to rage to something else, something small and frightened. For years she'd called me dramatic, soft, too emotional. But in that moment I saw what she really was. Fragile beneath the shine. I didn't smile. I didn't feel the rush I'd expected. Just a quiet exhale, the kind you take after carrying something heavy too long. My phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. Then another. I muted it and turned back to the video. Reporters were already posting headlines. Samantha Lowe, always quick, uploaded a photo to her feed. Aspen and Lace's winter elegance ends in chaos after vehicle repossession. The shot was brutal. Lauren's mascara smudged, her hand raised as if to stop the tow truck, the boutique glowing behind her like a burning palace. I closed the screen. She'd once told me value was what you could prove to others, what you could buy. But tonight, all that glitter had turned against her. Trust, I thought, was the one thing she'd never been able to purchase. The heater kicked on, filling the room with its low hum. Outside, the snow had thickened, covering the streets in silence. I pulled my coat around my shoulders and stepped out onto the porch. The air was sharp, full of that metallic cold that burned your lungs. In the distance, I could almost hear sirens, or maybe just wind slicing through the trees. My car sat parked at the curb, half buried in snow. The headlights of passing vehicles washed the world in brief flashes of white and gold. I leaned against the railing, looking up at the heavy clouds. Somewhere 2 hours west in Aspen, my sister's perfect night was collapsing. Somewhere, cameras were still flashing, capturing her downfall in real time. I didn't need to see the rest. I didn't need to hear the excuses that would come. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, quiet as snow, final as a signature. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat down again. The video kept replaying in my mind, her shouting. The car lifting off the ground, but instead of guilt, all I felt was the stillness of release. By the time the clock on the stove clicked past midnight, the last of the lights from the street outside had dimmed. The city was sleeping. The snow kept falling. And for the first time since Christmas, I felt like I could breathe. The message from my mother arrived just before noon. 3 words. Come talk. Now. No punctuation, no warmth. Just command disguised as concern. I stared at it for a long minute before replying nothing at all. Then I grabbed my coat, told Ava to pack her sketchbook, and started the car. The drive from Denver to Boulder took just over an hour, though it felt longer. Gray skies, melting snow, the kind of wind that scraped against the car windows. The further I drove, the more the air seemed to thicken with something I couldn't name. Dread, maybe, or the echo of old habits I thought I'd buried. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. The yard was littered with soggy leaves, the flower beds bare. The porch light, still shaped like a lantern, flickered against the last bit of afternoon. The front door was half open, as if they couldn't decide whether to let me in. My father stood there, arms crossed. His hair had thinned since Christmas, his face sharper, somehow, all edges and judgment. "You took your time," he said. I didn't bother to answer. Inside, the air smelled like old coffee and dust. The living room looked the same. Same furniture, same photographs, but something in it had changed. Maybe it was just me. My mother sat in her favorite chair posture, perfect, a folded newspaper in her lap. The front page headline was easy to read, even from the doorway: Fashion Boutique Loses Luxury Car at Winter Gala. The photo beneath showed Lauren mid-scream, mascara streaked. Mom didn't look up right away. When she did, her eyes were cold, like a judge who'd already reached a verdict. "You made this family a joke," she said. "People are talking about us at the market, at church, everywhere." I set my purse on the arm of the couch. "I didn't make anyone a joke. I just stopped paying for the show." She lifted the newspaper, shaking it slightly. "Your sister's humiliated. She can't even walk into town without whispers. Do you have any idea how that feels?" "Probably a lot like watching your child get mocked for giving a handmade gift," I said. "Only now it's public." Her expression hardened. "You're cruel." My father stepped closer, his voice low and heavy. "You don't know compassion, Claire. Family doesn't destroy each other. Family doesn't steal from each other and call it love." I said the words, coming sharper than I meant. "I didn't destroy anything. I just took back what was mine." He stared at me for a moment, jaw working like he wanted to say more, then turned away, muttering something about shame. Outside, I could see Ava through the window, sitting in the back seat, drawing shapes in the fogged glass with her finger. Her little face looked peaceful, unaware of the storm unraveling inside. Mom folded the paper and stood, moving closer. Her perfume, floral, old-fashioned, filled the space between us. "Do you really think you can live without family?" she asked quietly. "Because when the world turns its back, we're all you'll have." I met her gaze. "Maybe. But at least when the world turns its back, it won't ask for a check." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't expect to come back when you need us." "Don't worry," I said. "I won't." Silence stretched between us. The kind of silence that used to make me apologize just to make it stop. This time I let it breathe. I turned toward the door. My father didn't move to stop me. My mother's arms crossed tightly over her chest, a small tremor in her fingers she pretended wasn't there. When I stepped outside, the cold hit me hard, sharper than before, biting against the skin beneath my scarf. The wind carried the faint sound of a church bell from somewhere down the street. I walked toward the car, each crunch of my boots loud against the frozen driveway. Then, as I reached for the door, something slipped from my coat pocket, a small wooden frame. It hit the porch step with a soft crack. I bent to pick it up. The corner had splintered the image inside, an old photo of my parents holding me as a baby, tilted beneath the cracked glass. The frame had been handmade years ago, one of my first projects. I'd kept it all this time, maybe out of hope, maybe out of habit. I ran a thumb over the break. For a moment, I thought about leaving it there, a piece of evidence on their doorstep. Instead, I slipped it back into my pocket, closed the car door, and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could still see them. Two silhouettes in the doorway, one stiff with anger, the other with pride. They'd expected me to cry, to beg, to fold the way I always did. But as I drove away, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, I felt only calm. The road curved past the edge of town where snow still clung to the trees in patches, melting into veins of water that shimmered in the fading light. Ava glanced up from her drawing. "Are you okay, Mom?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah, sweetheart. I think I finally am." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her sketchbook. The pencil scratched softly against the paper, steady and sure. In the distance, the mountains glowed faintly pink in the sunset. I gripped the wheel tighter, not from fear, but from certainty. They thought I'd come back like I always did. They forgot that even the strongest bridge can collapse when it's crossed too many times. By the time I reached the city limits, the last light of day had disappeared. The road stretched out ahead, long and empty, wrapped in the soft hum of the heater and the sound of my daughter humming to herself. For once, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was peace, earned, not given. Spring came late that year, slow and uncertain, like it wasn't sure if it was welcome. The snow along the sidewalks had melted into muddy streaks, and the aspen trees outside my window were dusted with the first hints of green. The morning light poured through the blinds, soft and gold. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop coffee steaming beside it, ready to start the day like any other. But the first email that caught my eye wasn't from a client. It was from the Aspen Chronicle. Subject line: Aspen and Lace under financial investigation. My finger hovered over the touchpad before I clicked. The article was by Samantha Lowe. Of course it was. The headline stretched bold across the screen beneath it, a familiar photo. Lauren smiling in front of her boutique, now framed by scandal. The piece was detailed, precise, almost surgical. It mentioned anonymous sources, but I recognized my own fingerprints in the evidence, the financial statements, the invoices, the duplicated payments, all the proof Noah had helped me collect months earlier. According to leaked bank records, the article read funds intended for marketing and vendor payments were redirected into personal accounts. There was even a quote from an unnamed investor, a line I had once said to Noah over coffee. She built her empire on other people's backs, and eventually those people stood up. I sat back watching the words blur slightly as my coffee cooled. I hadn't expected it to feel like this. No rush, no triumph, just quiet. The kind of quiet that follows the sound of something collapsing far away. By noon, the fallout had already started. Social media was flooded with angry comments from customers demanding refunds. Someone had posted screenshots of canceled orders and unanswered emails. Aspen and Lace's page was locked within hours. Lauren's accounts, Instagram, Facebook, even her personal blog, went dark the next day. The silence that followed was louder than any apology she could have given. A week later, another email arrived. This one from a property management office in Boulder. My parents had received a notice about unpaid taxes. Without my transfers, the house they'd bragged about for years was suddenly too heavy to hold. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Life, for the first time, was simple again. I worked my freelance hours, took Ava to school, learned to enjoy the small routines that used to feel invisible. 2 months after everything fell apart, I rented a tiny space in downtown Denver, a corner suite with good light and old wood floors, and turned it into a workshop. A handmade sign on the door read, "Reclaim Finance, Financial Clarity for Women." It wasn't glamorous, no PR photos, no curated image, but women came. Single mothers, divorcees, teachers, nurses, each one with her own version of the same story. Too much, giving too much guilt, not enough left for themselves. I taught them how to track spending, how to protect savings, how to say no without explaining. Every time I watched someone's shoulders drop with relief, it felt like reclaiming a little of myself too. One afternoon, Ellen Parker stopped by. She'd been one of my first clients, though now she was more of a friend. She brought coffee and a small plant for my window. "You know," she said, stirring sugar into her cup, "people always see the truth too late. They'll realize who you really were when they've already lost you." I smiled, shaking my head. "That's usually when it happens." She looked at me with a mix of pity and admiration. "You ever think about going back?" "No," I said. "I think they're the ones who need to look back." That night, as I locked up the office, I thought about how strange it was that peace could grow from ashes. At home, Ava was at the kitchen table working on a poster for school. She'd drawn a tree with green leaves and written in big letters across the top, "Strong roots, new growth." "What's this for?" I asked. "Career Day," she said proudly. "We're supposed to talk about what our parents do." "Oh, yeah?" I smiled. "And what did you say I do?" She grinned, missing a tooth. "You help people not get tricked anymore." I laughed softly. "That's one way to put it." She frowned, thinking, "But it's true, right? You show them how to keep what they make." "Yeah," I said, my chest tightening with a quiet kind of pride. "That's exactly what I do." Later, after she'd gone to bed, I sat at my desk and scrolled through my emails again. Most were client inquiries and bank confirmations, but one subject line froze me in place. From Lauren Bennett. Subject: "You won. Happy now." The message was short. "You got what you wanted. My business is gone. Mom and Dad barely talk to me. Are you satisfied?" There was no apology, no acknowledgement. Just the same self-pity wrapped in accusation. I hovered over reply for a long moment. Then I clicked. Move to spam. It felt strangely freeing. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the fridge filling the quiet. Outside, the city lights shimmered faintly through the mist. Karma doesn't run on anyone's schedule. It doesn't rush, doesn't announce itself. It arrives when you've stopped expecting it, when you're finally too tired to care. The next morning, I cleared the papers off my desk. Sunlight poured in through the window, glinting off the small wooden frame beside my laptop. The one I'd made years ago still cracked, but mended the photo inside, slightly faded. I placed it carefully beside the potted plant Ellen had given me, the two symbols of what stayed and what grew. Then I opened a new spreadsheet, sipped my coffee, and started typing the next lesson plan. The cursor blinked steady and sure. Proof that life, when rebuilt from truth, doesn't need perfection to be good. The rain started around 9, steady at first, then harder, pounding against the windows like a warning. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and distant, but close enough to rattle the glass. I was halfway through a book I wasn't really reading when the sound came. 3 sharp knocks at the door, then another harder. At first I thought I'd imagined it. No one visited this late, but then it came again, louder. Desperate echoing through the quiet house. Ava was asleep down the hall, her nightlight casting a soft glow under the door. I set my book aside and reached for my phone, checking the security app. The camera feed flickered once before the image came into focus. Lauren stood on the porch, drenched in rain. Her hair clung to her face, her mascara streaked down to her jawline. In one hand, she held a half-empty bottle of something dark. Her other hand slammed against the door again, shaking it in its frame. "Claire," she screamed, voice breaking through the storm. "Open the damn door." My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen her in months, not since the investigation, not since the order was filed. The restraining order sat in a folder in my desk drawer, a piece of paper I'd hoped I'd never have to use. I unlocked my phone and dialed 911. The operator's voice came calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? My sister's at my house, I said quietly. Eyes still fixed on the screen. She's intoxicated and violating a court order. My daughter's inside. Are you safe? Yes. The doors are locked. Stay on the line, ma'am. Officers are on their way. Outside, Lauren kept pounding. You ruined everything, she shouted. Do you hear me? Everything. The rain poured harder, the wind tossing her words back at her. I started recording the feed hands, trembling only slightly. She leaned toward the door, pressing her forehead against it. You took my business, my car, my life. Mom and Dad lost their house because of you. I didn't answer. She hit the door again, weaker this time. You think you're better than me? You think this makes you strong? Behind me, I heard the creak of a bedroom door. Mom. Ava's small voice frightened. I turned quickly. Stay in your room, sweetheart, I said softly. Lock the door. Her eyes were wide. Is it Aunt Lauren? Yes, but it's okay. Just stay put, all right. She nodded and disappeared behind the door. The click of the lock was a small comfort. The storm raged outside. I watched through the camera as Lauren stumbled backward off the porch, yelling something I couldn't make out. Then headlights cut through the rain. 2 police cruisers pulling up to the curb, red and blue lights flashing against the wet pavement. The officers stepped out, raincoats glistening. One spoke into a radio, the other approached her slowly, hand outstretched. Ma'am, I heard him say, through the muffled audio step away from the door. Lauren turned, her hair plastered against her face. She's my sister. She can't keep shutting me out, ma'am. You need to calm down. You're in violation of a restraining order. She shook her head violently. No, you don't understand. She tried to push past them, but one caught her arm, steady but firm. Don't touch me, she shouted, twisting free before stumbling into the mud. For a second, I thought she'd run, but instead she sank to her knees, bottle slipping from her hand, shattering against the concrete. Her voice broke into sobs. She destroyed me, she cried. She destroyed everything. The officers exchanged a look, then one crouched beside her, speaking softly. Eventually, she stopped fighting. They helped her to her feet, guiding her toward the patrol car. As they walked her away, she turned her head toward the house, rain streaking down her cheeks. Her voice was raw, almost childlike. You think you're strong, Claire. You're just alone. Her words hit the window like hail. I stood still, the phone still in my hand, the blue and red lights pulsing across the living room walls. The doorbell rang once. A soft, cautious knock. I opened the inner door just enough to meet the officer's eyes through the screen. Ma'am, he said, we're taking her in tonight. She'll be processed for disorderly conduct and violation of the protective order. You'll get a follow-up report in the morning. I nodded. Thank you. He hesitated. You did the right thing calling us. When they drove away, the sound of the rain filled the silence they left behind. I closed the door, locked it twice, and leaned against it. My hands were shaking, but my eyes were dry. A minute later, the phone rang again. Mom. I let it buzz once before answering. Claire, she said, her voice cracking. What did you do? They called us from the station. You had her arrested. She came to my house drunk, screaming. I said, you know about the restraining order. She needs help, not punishment. She needs consequences, I said, steady now. God, Claire, you're so cold. I looked toward the dark window where rain streaked down in crooked lines. "No, Mom," I said quietly. "For once, I'm calm." She sniffled into the phone. "You'll regret this someday." I used to regret everything I said. Now I just want peace. She didn't respond. The line went dead. I set the phone down on the counter, the silence roaring in my ears. Down the hall, a door creaked open. Ava appeared in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Is she gone?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She walked over, climbed into my lap, and wrapped her arms around me. Her small body was warm against mine, grounding. We sat like that for a long time, just listening. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, the thunder fading into the distance. "I was scared," she whispered. "I know I said," pressing a kiss to her hair. "But it's over now." She nodded, eyes half closed. "Can we stay here for a while?" "Yeah," I said. "We're not going anywhere." Outside, the storm finally gave up. The air smelled like wet pine and quiet relief. Through the open window, the wind brushed against the curtains, gentle now. Silence filled the house, not the uneasy kind, not the one I'd lived in for years. This one felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was boundary. My silence wasn't revenge. It was peace I'd earned. By December, winter had swallowed the city again. The wind carried fine snow that shimmered under the streetlights and disappeared into silence. I'd started measuring time differently, not by months or holidays, but by how long it had been since I'd last heard from them. 3 weeks of quiet, 4, sometimes 5. It was a strange kind of peace, uneven, but real. Then one afternoon my phone rang. I recognized the number before I even looked. Mom hesitated, staring at the screen until the call almost went to voicemail. Then I answered. Her voice was rough, like she'd been crying for hours. "Claire," she said, "we're losing the house." I closed my eyes. What happened? "The bank," she whispered. "They've foreclosed. The taxes, the payments, everything's past due. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. I don't know what to do." I pressed my fingers against the windowsill, feeling the chill seeping through the glass. "You should have called the bank months ago," I said quietly. "We thought it would work out," she said, her tone sharp, defensive. "You could help just this once. You make good money, don't you? You could cover a little." "Just enough to buy time." Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were familiar. The same loop we'd played for years. "Help us. Save us. You're the strong one. I can't," I said finally. "You can," she insisted. "You just won't." I took a deep breath. "No, Mom, I won't, because I can't keep saving people who refuse to stand on their own." There was silence on the other end. Heavy, brittle. Then she said very quietly, "You've changed." "I hope so," I said. The line went dead. A month later, an email arrived from her account. No message, just a photo. The Boulder house looked hollow without the life that used to fill it. The front yard was bare, the swing Dad built years ago, lying crooked in the snow. A for sale sign leaned against the gate, half covered in frost. I stared at it for a long time. It should have hurt more than it did. 2 weeks after that, a letter came in the mail. Handwritten, the paper wrinkled at the edges. "Claire, we didn't mean for it to come to this. We thought we were doing what was best for everyone. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe you were right. But you've destroyed this family. There's nothing left now. I hope someday you understand what you've done. No signature, just an empty space where love used to be." I sat at the kitchen table reading it under the dim light. The words bled slightly where tears, or maybe spilled coffee, had soaked the ink. I read it twice, then folded it carefully. Ava was coloring on the floor beside me, humming to herself. She looked up when she noticed my silence. "Mom, you okay?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah, baby, I'm fine." She tilted her head, studying me the way only children can. "You look sad." "I'm not sad because I lost them," I said slowly. "I'm sad because they never really found themselves." She thought about that, then nodded. "Grandma doesn't understand, huh?" "No," I said softly. "But maybe someday she will." Outside, snow began to fall again, small flakes drifting past the window, catching light like bits of glass. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when everyone's inside. and the world is still. I stood, crossed the room, and picked up the small wooden frame from the shelf. The same one I'd made years ago. The same one that had cracked and been repaired. The old family photo was still inside, though faded now, the four of us standing in front of the house in bolder smiles, wide and perfect. I slipped the new letter behind the photo, pressing it flat against the glass. The paper fit almost too neatly, as if it belonged there all along. Then I looked at the picture again. It was strange how the faces had changed meaning. My parents looked proud, my sister radiant, and me, off to the side, half in shadow. The girl I used to be, always trying to fit herself into the frame. Now when I looked, I didn't see loss. I saw distance, the kind you earn when you finally stop reaching for what doesn't reach back. Ava came over, peeking up at the frame. "That's you." "That was me," I said. She smiled. "You look younger." "I was," I said with a small laugh, "and a little lost." She leaned against my arm. "But you found us." I kissed the top of her head. "Yeah," I said. "I did." We stood there a while, watching the snow drift across the porch. The world outside was white and quiet and cold, but inside the air was warm, heavy, with the smell of cinnamon from the tea on the stove. I set the frame back on the table beside my laptop. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. Just me and Ava, now the only ones left in the picture, who still understood what love was supposed to mean. Some relationships don't end because of hate. They end because someone finally gets tired. I ran my thumb across the edge of the frame, then let my hand fall away. The snow kept falling outside, steady and soundless, covering the world, in something that almost looked like peace. By spring, Denver felt alive again. The snow had melted into small rivers running along the sidewalks, and the air smelled faintly of rain and new beginnings. For the first time in years, I could walk outside without the weight of winter pressing on my chest. The library's community room buzzed with quiet energy. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, lighting up the whiteboard where I'd written financial freedom for women. The tables were full. Single mothers, women rebuilding after divorce, one or two, who'd just learned how to open a savings account. They looked nervous, hopeful the way I once had. I stood at the front papers in hand and smiled. "Here's what I want you to remember," I said. "You can't build happiness on debt, especially emotional debt. If someone keeps you around because they owe you, that's not love. That's leverage." A few women laughed softly, some nodded, and one even clapped. I paused, let the warmth of the moment settle. "When you learn to keep what's yours," I continued, "you stop confusing guilt for generosity. You stop mistaking silence for peace." After the class, a woman named Tanya came up, her notebook full of notes. "I wish someone had told me this 10 years ago," she said. I smiled. "So do I. But you're here now." Outside, the afternoon was bright. The mountains shimmered in the distance, pale blue against the sky. Ava met me by the steps, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "You ready?" she asked. "Ready for what?" She grinned. "The school fair, remember I entered my project?" I laughed. "Of course. Let's go." The school gym was crowded and full of color, posters, crafts, the smell of popcorn. Ava led me to a table lined with handmade art pieces. In the middle sat her project, a small wooden frame carved with tiny mountain peaks, and the word "strong" etched across the bottom. "It's beautiful," I said, crouching beside her. One of the judges, a middle-aged woman with silver glasses, smiled at Ava. "You made this all by yourself?" "Yes, ma'am," Ava said proudly. "My mom taught me." The judge glanced at me, smiling. "You taught her well." Ava's cheeks flushed pink. "She says wood breaks if you push it the wrong way, but it's stronger after you fix it." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good lesson." When they moved on, Ava leaned close. "Do you think I'll win?" "You already did," I said. That evening after we got home, I found an email waiting in my inbox from a local news station. Someone from the Denver Morning Report wanted to feature the financial workshop for a community segment. I almost deleted it. Attention had never sat comfortably with me, but Ava convinced me otherwise. "You tell other people's stories all the time," she said. "Maybe it's time you tell yours." The interview was set a week later. A small camera crew arrived at the library, the reporter cheerful and professional. She asked about my classes, my motivation, the message I wanted to share. I used to think silence meant weakness. I told her that keeping the peace was the same as keeping love. But silence can be power too, when it means you've finally chosen yourself. When it aired that Sunday, I didn't expect anyone I knew to see it. But a few hours later, an envelope arrived in the afternoon mail. No return address, my name, handwritten in familiar loops. I hesitated before opening it. The paper inside was creased a few smudges near the edges, like it had been folded and unfolded many times. Claire, I saw the interview. You looked calm. I don't think I've ever seen you that way before. You were right. About all of it. I spent so long trying to be seen that I forgot what it meant to see myself. I'm starting over. Small town, new job. Nothing fancy. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know. I'm trying. Love, Lauren. I read it twice, the second time slower. Her handwriting had always leaned forward impatient, like she was trying to outrun the words. But this time it felt steadier, almost careful. Ava came in just then, holding her art ribbon from the fair. Second place, bright blue. Can we hang it next to your desk? She asked. Of course, I said. While she climbed on a chair to tape it beside my bookshelf, I looked back at the letter. Then I went to the cabinet and pulled out a small wooden box I'd been working on, smooth, squished edges, a simple latch. Inside were the pieces of my own story receipts from the workshop. A photo of Ava's first day of school, the newspaper clipping about the program's launch. And now Lauren's letter. I folded it carefully and placed it inside. On the shelf nearby sat the old handmade frame, the one from years ago, still slightly cracked, still whole. I set the new box beside it, old and new, mistake and healing, 2 pieces of the same history. The fire in the hearth crackled softly. Its light flickered across the walls, catching the curve of the wooden lid. Ava climbed down and stood beside me watching the glow. What's in the box? She asked. Memories, I said. Some of them took a long time to stop hurting. Do they still hurt? Not anymore, I smiled. Now they just remind me where we've been. She nodded, thoughtful, and leaned her head against my arm. We stood there for a while, the warmth from the fire reaching our faces. Outside, the last of the snowmelt trickled down the street, clear and shining in the moonlight. Forgiveness isn't for them, I thought. It's for the part of you that finally stops waiting for an apology. When I looked toward the window, the sunlight from earlier had faded into a soft dusk. The sky glowed pale gold reflected in the glass of the wooden box. 2 generations, 2 lessons, and 1 quiet piece that finally felt like home. The cabin sat quietly at the edge of Estes Park, wrapped in pine trees and a thin blanket of snow. Through the windows, golden light spilled across the frozen yard, soft and steady. The air inside smelled like cinnamon pine and something baking in the oven. Ava was setting the table, her hair falling over her face as she tried to line the napkins perfectly. It was Christmas Eve, 2 years since that night everything changed. Too many forks, I said, watching her from the kitchen counter. There's no such thing as too many, she said, grinning. Ellen arrived first, wrapped in a red scarf and laughter. This place looks like a postcard, she said, stamping snow from her boots. It's small, I said, taking her coat. But it's ours. Small, she said, glancing around at the wooden beams and glowing lights, feels a lot like peace. Noah showed up just after holding a bottle of wine, and the same half-smile he'd had since college. You're in the middle of the woods, and still managed to make it feel like home, he said, looking around. Ava peeked out from behind the door. Hi, Uncle Noah, he laughed. That title's getting official now, huh? We all gathered near the fireplace. The snow outside thickened, clinging to the windows. There was no grand feast, no glittering tree covered in ornaments, just a few candles a pie, and the soft hum of carols from a small speaker on the shelf. I didn't miss the noise of the parties, the pretense the way we used to perform happiness for other people. This kind of quiet, the kind that holds instead of hides, was what I'd wanted all along. Dinner passed in easy laughter. Ellen told stories about her students. Noah teased Ava about her wood-carving trophies, and I found myself laughing without the carefulness I used to carry. After dessert, Ava disappeared into her room for a moment and came back with something small wrapped in brown paper and twine. For you, Mom, she said shyly. I took the gift, feeling the familiar lump rise in my throat. Inside was a small wooden frame, the edges smooth, the carving precise. At the bottom, 1 word. Peace. I ran my thumb over the letters the same way I used to trace the cracked edge of that old frame years ago. You made this. She nodded. Took me 3 weeks. It's perfect, I whispered. She smiled. Now it's your turn. I laughed, pretending to be surprised. How do you know I have something for you? Because you're you, she said simply. I went to the shelf and picked up the wooden box I'd been working on in secret. It was newer, sturdier, made from oak, polished to a soft shine. Across the lid, carved carefully in block letters, were the words, "The loudest revenge is peace." Ava lifted the lid, slowly, eyes wide. "It's beautiful." "It's yours," I said. "For whatever you want to keep safe." She looked up at me, her eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Now I get it," she said. "Get what? What you mean when you say being happy is the best revenge." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Yeah," I said softly. "Sometimes the only way to win is to stop fighting." We placed both pieces, the frame and the box, side by side on the mantel. The firelight made them glow as if they'd always belonged together. Noah raised his glass, then his voice gentle but sure. "To the ones who finally learned when to stop." Ellen lifted hers, and to the ones who didn't stop, believing they deserved better. Ava grinned, holding her cocoa mug, and to starting over, she added. We clinked glasses, the sound soft against the crackle of the fire. Outside, snow began to fall harder, blanketing the trees, muffling the world. For a moment, I just looked around. The faces I'd chosen, not the ones I'd been born to please. Ellen's quiet warmth, Noah's steady calm, Ava's bright laughter. This was family, I realized. Not the one that judged or took, but the one that stayed when the noise was gone. Later, when the dishes were cleared and the others had gone home, the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that used to scare me, but now felt like shelter. I sat by the window, the fire dimming behind me. Ava had gone to bed, her new box tucked safely under her arm. Outside, the snow glowed under the porch light, each flake landing soundlessly, disappearing into white. I thought about the years behind me. The shouting, the silence, the nights when peace felt like something I'd never earn. And then I thought of this moment, this calm, this gentle hum of being alive and unburdened. I'd spent so long mistaking endurance for strength. Now I knew better. Strength was in the letting go. I looked at the reflection in the window, myself, older, steadier, whole. The voice in my head no longer asked what I could have done differently. It only whispered, "You made it." I took one last sip of wine and leaned back, closing my eyes as the snow continued to fall. I used to think silence meant weakness, but it's not. It's the voice of the survivor, the one who stopped shouting to be heard and started listening to her own peace. Somewhere out there, they were probably still wondering what happened to me, wondering when I'd come back, when I'd forgive, when I'd play my part again. But the truth was, they'd already lost what mattered most, not my help, not my money, but my presence. And by the time they realized it, it was too late. When I finally let go, I didn't lose. I found peace. And if you've ever had to choose between duty and peace, remember this. No one is worth the kind of sacrifice that costs you yourself. The loudest revenge isn't anger or victory. It's peace. Outside, the wind softened and the snow kept falling. Through the frosted glass, the handmade frame and the new wooden box sat side by side on the mantel, catching the last flickers of candlelight. Together they glowed like small beacons in the quiet winter night, proof that forgiveness, justice, and freedom can all look the same when you finally stop fighting to be seen and start choosing to simply be.